Well, everyone, I want to say again, thank you very much for coming tonight. We're very excited to have David Thibodeau here. He's going to be speaking, and then we'll take some of your questions for about half an hour. Please help me welcome David Thibodeau.
I'm used to standing when I do these things, but this will be a different form. Wow. Thank you so much all for coming out. It's a pleasure to be here tonight in the live music capital of the world, Austin, Texas. And I'm very proud to be in Austin right now. And it's different when you do. I've done these for the last couple weeks, done quite a few signings, and it's just different when you see your crowd here from the place that you live. So thank you for coming out. I guess I'll start off at the beginning. I'm going to try to keep it brief. Sometimes I tend to get a little sidetracked because in this issue, there's so much to cover. And one of the problems, I guess I'll start with one of the problems with the trials that occurred in San Antonio 6.5 years ago, up to the Senator Danforth inquest that's going to be occurring on coming up in the next couple months. Is the trials in San Antonio focused on the events of February 28th and the BATF attack. And basically they tried the people, 11 of them, on conspiracy to commit murder charges, which everyone was acquitted of that charge. Several of them were found guilty of a lesser charge of aiding and abetting voluntary manslaughter. But due to a little snafu, the jury was given a 94-page rule book that they had to follow in the trials. I see a lot of people shaking their head. I mean, a jury should be able to hear all the evidence. That's the way I view it. And they shouldn't be limited by a federal judge saying this is what you have to do when you make your decision. So they were basically, 5 of them were found guilty of having a, 9 of them were found guilty of having a firearm during what the judge called the commission of a crime for February 28th, and that is when the BATF attacked. If you had a gun in your hand, basically you went to jail. Some of them are in jail for 40 years on a weapons violation that the jury felt was thrown out, according to the count 3 aspect of the verdict. So I have talked to Sarah Bain, the head jury forewoman that was there that day at the trials in San Antonio, and she said, had we seen all the evidence that we had seen since the trials that the judge suppressed from us, we would have acquitted everybody on all charges. So basically right now there's 7 political prisoners, some of which have been under very harsh conditions in various institutions throughout the country. Some of them are there for 40 years on a weapons violation that the jury was thrown out, and I think that's a very important point to make. The whole problems with the trials in San Antonio was the fact that the judge focused only on February 28th. And my concern is with the hearings of Danforth, he's only going to focus on the events of April 19th and what happened at the back of the building, and of course the infrared videotape that we'll be discussing a little later. So the big problem that I have is you can't really understand Waco. You can't understand what really happened there unless you handle it from A to Z and you cover everything in between. Because what the FBI did when they set up their speaker systems, it was so crass. The light systems, literally the psychological effect of here's a guy that they say, David Koresh, is a person that's very unstable, and you have a bunch of religious wackos is what we've been called consistently throughout the course of the 51 days. And their plan is to play loud music, sounds of rabbits being slaughtered, Tibetan's monk chanting, just various, taking the phone off the hook for 48 hours at a time. So their plan was to make us even more unstable. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So the point I wanted to make in opening up is I hope Senator Danforth, former Senator Danforth, and I hope that some of the civil cases and the Senate inquest that's going to be taking place will focus more than just on April 19th, because you'll never be able to see the big picture unless you focus on the whole thing from A to Z. So with that, I'd like to start off by saying I'm David Thibodeau, and I grew up in Bangor, Maine. And ever since I was a little kid and I first picked up drumsticks, I knew what I wanted to do with my life. I wanted to play music. And so I did everything in my power to make that dream happen. Once I graduated from high school, I got a job. I started saving up to go to Los Angeles. I played in several bands, came home from school every single day and played the drums and just lived in that little world. Literally closing my eyes and seeing thousands of people in front of me and just getting off on the rush of what that would be like every day. And that was my only goal in life, setting out in this whole adventure. And I ended up in Hollywood finally, and I graduated from music school. And over the course of the next 6 months or so, I was playing in a band out there, and had a dead-end job. I was working at Mann's Chinese Theater at the gift shop. And I had one of those stupid red smocks on. And I remember one day I was so frustrated with my life. I looked up to the heavens, or at least I looked up to the ceiling of Mann's Chinese Theater, and I said, Lord, what are you saving me for? You know, when can I finally meet the people that I'm supposed to meet so I can start my life, so I can do what I want to do instead of being in this rut? And I said, you know, just please make this happen. I know that I'm here for a reason. I know that I'm not here just aimlessly walking through life in Hollywood, living, you know, living with a bunch of guys in a one-room apartment. And 2 days later, I was late for a band rehearsal. I had my band members with me, and I made them, literally made them. They didn't want to do it. I made them stop at Guitar Center on Sunset Boulevard so I could buy some drumsticks. And when I did, I walked into the electronic drum room, which I had a very bad habit of doing. They always had a kit set up, and I would always sit down and play it. And there were these two gentlemen that were standing there looking at the electronic drum set, and they asked me if I was a drummer. So I was, and I sat down, I played the drums for them. They said that they would be interested in purchasing this kit, and they wanted to hear it. So I sat down and played for 3 minutes or so. And when I got up, there was a guy in a business suit, and there was a guy in a T-shirt with ragged jeans. It was just kind of really laid back. And the guy, the suit, if you will, approached me, and he says, wow, you know, pretty good drummer. We're looking for one for our band. Would you be interested in getting together with us? I said, yeah, sure. And I'm in a band now, but I'm always interested to play with different people. And so they handed me their card, and I looked at the card, and on the back of the card there was all this religious scripture that was revolving around the kingdom to be set up. I didn't realize that at the time, nor did I really care. I saw the religious scripture, and I handed the card back to him. I said, well, thank you very much. You know, I'm a spiritual person, but I don't believe that I'm really looking to be in a Christian band at this time. And that's when Steve piped up, and he said, well, you know, it's like this. We're not really a Christian band. What we are is we've studied the scripture. I've been all over the world with this guy, David Koresh, and he introduced David. And David didn't really say too much. He just kind of sat back and let Steve do most of the talking. He said, I've been all over the world, and you know, we've studied this book they call the Bible. We've ripped it apart, and we just have some insights to it. And you know, really all we want to do is play music right now, and you know, we do have a message that is revolving around the scripture, but you know, that's really not our focus right now. We just would like to play music with you. And I said, okay. I kind of left with the attitude, don't call me, I'll call you. And a couple days later, you know, things weren't going so well, and I just started thinking about this, and I was really impressed with the suit, and he was a very good orator, you know, Steve Schneider, and David was just real quiet and, you know, kind of mysterious. He said a few things, and then I gave him a call, and over the course of the next day or so, we got together and they had a property in Pomona, which is about 45 minutes out of Hollywood, and we went there and played some music. I thought David was a great guitarist. I met their artist, Cliff Sellers, who had airbrushed guitars, and it was just, they seemed to really have it together. They were very professional, and that's something that I liked. Well, over the course of the next couple months, I got to know him a little better, and specifically, Steve Schneider would come over with some of the guys and give us studies, because I said, you know, we want to show you some of these things out of this book. And I remember the first night, I had my roommates, and they were all sitting around. I said, hey, I forgot to tell you guys, but I have a couple people coming over we're going to have a Bible study. I hope you don't mind. And they were like, why didn't you tell us? You know, I could have gotten a date with my girlfriend, or we could have gone out to the movies or something, you know. And they were literally reaching for their coats when the knock came at the door. And it was Steve Schneider, and it's Jamie Casillo, Greg Summers, just several of the younger guys were there. I even think Cliff was there. Let's see, Peter was there, Peter Hipsman. And you should have seen the look on their faces when the door knocked. And I opened the door, and they all came in and said, hey, you know, you all ready? They had a 12-pack of beer with them. And all of a sudden, my roommate said, well, you know, I think we can stay for a few minutes and listen to what they got to say. And I just remember when Steve Schneider sat down, and he had this 1-inch margin Bible. You know, we can make your notes. And he opened that book, and every page that he had all this cross references color coded in it. On every single page, it was just absolutely filled with cross references. Instantly, I was impressed, because I could see that I was never impressed and I hope I don't offend anyone here, but I was never impressed with the TV preachers and the hypocrisy of not all, but several organized religions. You know, I was always more into the small movements of religion that seem to be a little more pure in heart, and then as they grow, and of course, it becomes a money financial institution, it tends to lose focus a little, I think, a lot. And so I was impressed with the way that they ripped the Bible apart, and they had really done their research and studied. And that's what impressed me, was the fact that it was more of an intellectual study than it was an indoctrinization, or they never came off preachy. That would have turned me off instantly. And so they went through their study, and 2 hours later, I'm looking around, my roommates are still sitting there. So to me, that was an act of God. And I remember over the course of the next couple months, we got together several occasions and had studies. Then one day, David Koresh invited me out to Waco, Texas, a place called Waco. And he said, we're going out there for Passover, which is one of the 2-week periods, the festival periods of God in the Scripture. And he said, literally, there's going to be hundreds of people from all over the world that are going to be coming to learn these truths. He says, you're going to meet, you know, people that are carpenters, people that are architects, people that have gone to seminary school, people that are pastors in their own churches in England. I said, well, that sounds kind of interesting, and he asked me if I wanted to go, and at the time I was pretty adventuresome, and I did. So we pulled up to Mount Carmel, and I took a look at all the single buildings that line the place up, and I just thought it was one of the strangest places I'd ever seen in my life. And we got there a week early, so we started playing some music and stuff, and people started arriving. And I started to question these people. I said, why are you here? What do you hope to gain from this? And I must have talked to 10 or 15 different people at various times, and they basically all told me the same thing. They said that they had learned more about the Scripture from this person, David Koresh, than they had their whole lives studying on their own, or being pastors, or going to seminary school. And it just like everyone seemed to have the same testimony. So I wanted to see what it was going to be, you know, what it was really all about. I always knew that there was a mystery to this book. I always wondered in my life, how come so many thousands and thousands of people have died, put their lives on the line, and sacrificed their lives for this Scripture throughout the course of time? It has a power to it. And over the course of that 2 weeks, I remember the very first study, and the reason that I'm relating this story is because a lot of people ask me, you know, how could you follow someone like David Koresh? People say this, but they have no idea who he was. All they know is what they've heard, and they've made their judgments because they've heard some very bad things. Well, there's always two sides of the story. In this case, there's, I think, hundreds of sides to the story. The first study that he gave, he had a Bible, and he held it up. He says, most people see this book and they see 2 pieces of cow leather with a bunch of pages in between. And they spend their life trying to unravel the mystery or get some kind of basic truth out of it. He says, no, when I see, and he held it up to his forehead, he goes, when I see it panoramically, as if it's happening now, from Genesis to Revelation, right now as it's happening. I mean, that was a pretty tough pill to swallow, but over the course of the next 2 weeks, we had studies that would last anywhere from 10 to 12 hours a day. And they were very entertaining. I mean, it wasn't something that I found dry. I mean, I actually started to become involved and become part of this world of the Scripture, and it was something that I started to embrace. And I literally, over the course of that 2 weeks, came to believe, you know, and I wasn't even 100% sure if this was the final message or this was the messenger. But I came to believe that David did see the Scripture that way, panoramically, as if it had happened, as if he had been there. And when he gave a study with literally the looks on the faces of the people that are written in the Scripture, so you could actually see the sarcasms, you could see the nuances of the communication that was taking place in the Bible, where before I could never see that reading it on my own. It just made me go to sleep, frankly. And so it was something that held the interest. I think one thing that I saw David do on several occasions, and he did this with me as well, after that 2 or 3 week period when everyone started to leave, we played music a little more, and you know, I was trying to absorb all this stuff. He says, what I want to do now is, you know, I want you to be my drummer. I want you to be in the band, but now have the basic foundations of the 7 seals, the first 5 seals, if you will. And what I want to do is, would you like to go to Maine and see your parents? Absolutely, I'd love to go see my parents. You know, it was on him, right? Why not? And my head was spinning, frankly. I definitely needed some time to absorb it all. And so he sent me up to Maine. He said, take a couple weeks, take a month, take whatever time you need. If you find that, and ask people about these 7 seals. Go to preachers, go to rabbis, go to anybody. And if they have some insight into the seals, let me know. I might be interested. But I'm pretty sure that you're going to find that no one even knows what they are. Or most people are going to say that there's a mystery and we're waiting for Christ to come back before those things can be revealed. If they don't know and you want to learn more, come on back, we want to have you in. I said, well, okay, that's pretty fair. Well, over the course of the next month, I went to Maine, and I got a call one day about a month later, and I was putting it off because I was convicted at this point. I mean, I had known that there was something there, but at the same time, I didn't really want to entirely give up my life and just go and live on what we call the anthill, because we got the Texas fire ants here. And there's several at Mount Carmel. So I ended up going back, and I ended up going back to Hollywood, and several events took place, if you will. I'm going to kind of wrap it up real quickly here. Within 6 months, we ended up, of being in Hollywood, we ended up moving to Mount Carmel. Now, there's several events that took place that are really important, but because I really want to get to questions, you're going to have to look it up in the book. But a lot of very, very interesting, very deep things happened to me during that period of time that I was in Hollywood, and a lot of them revolved around a certain friend of mine who was in a band as well out there. And Koresh had some insights that literally just blew me away, that he could know this about my friend. And all these things were factors. So we ended up moving to Mount Carmel about a year before the BATF attack of February 28th. And throughout that year, we tore down the little houses, and we started to build up the major complex there called Mount Carmel, and the big building that everyone saw. We built a swimming pool. David Koresh and Steve Schneider he was, a brilliant salesman. I mean, Steve basically would negotiate all the deals. We ended up getting go-karts, building a track. The children, some of the younger boys, got small dirt bikes, and we would all go out and play on the track. What ended up happening is through a person that I met in Waco, and we had ties in Waco. I mean, this wasn't some community that was just totally within themselves out in the middle of nowhere. I mean, the Branch Davidians, or what became to be known as the Branch Davidians, actually the Branch Davidians stemmed from an earlier group that had lived out there, had been there for 60 years. David Koresh was the third of what people out there called inspired, or if you will, a prophet. And he was the third one to get the complete vision of the 7 seals. Before them, there was Hodeth and Lois Roden, who preceded David. So it wasn't just some fly-by-night group that David started. It was something that built off a foundation of several years. And there were several people that had been there almost from the inception of it, who tell me stories. David first came on the scene. His name was Vernon Howell. When he first came on the scene, he could barely formulate a sentence. I mean, he had a great knowledge of the scripture, but he was no orator. He was great with working on cars, but he stuttered. He had a stuttering problem. And literally after 1985, when he claimed to have his vision of the 7 seals, he started to talk very clearly, very concisely, and it was almost like an overnight transformation that a lot of the older people there told me about, which I thought was very impressive. Well, I ended up meeting someone whose father was Henry McMahon, who was a licensed firearm dealer that ran a place called Hewitt Handguns, and it was right outside of Waco in Hewitt, Texas. And Henry basically started to get studies from David and started to learn a lot of things, and thought that, David was someone that was very special, someone that was very inspired, and he started to take David to gun shows. I mean, that was kind of his forte. And through these little excursions of going to gun shows here in Texas, David and Paul and Stephen Schneider found out a couple things. They found out that because of all the legislation that's coming down the pike, a .223 round is going up in value. The AK-47s are going up in value from $500 to $2,000 overnight. And they started to actually take on the business of going to gun shows and doing everything legally, having the yellow sheets on all the firearms, and basically buying and selling legally. There were people inside that made vests, hunter's vests, that were sold at the gun shows, as well as several other things that occurred. And one of the things that ended up happening is, as we were building the pool that summer, helicopters started to fly by really low, and we could tell they were taking pictures. We knew that we were being watched. I mean, you know, a big group of people out there in the middle of nowhere is pretty strange, according to most people. Of course, most Americans tend to forget that America was founded on a bunch of religious extremists that came to this nation and started to put together the Constitution. And I think it's important to remember that the Baptists were scourged in the streets when they first came. And I'm sure a lot of you know about the history of the Mormons and what they had to suffer when they were first starting with their particular doctrine. And so it comes from a long foundation of, I guess, killing or beating up what you can't understand or what you don't want to understand, or specifically what the establishment can't understand. And from this point that Henry came into being, that's when all the gun stuff started happening. A couple other interesting things took place. Well, Henry McMahon one day gave us a call, and he had been raided by the BATF, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, and they were going through all his yellow sheets, and they started to ask Henry, and Davey Aguilera, the BATF agent, headed up the whole investigation. He started to ask a lot of questions about David Koresh to Henry, and he says, well, Henry says, you're investigating me. Why are you asking me all these questions about Koresh? You should investigate Koresh or go speak with him. So Henry excused himself and went to the kitchen, and this all came out at the trials in San Antonio. Everything I'm saying, I can prove. It has happened. So Henry McMahon went into the other room, he got the phone, and he called David, and he said, David, the BATF are here, and they're raiding me, they're going through all my yellow sheets, and they're asking me a lot of questions about you. What do you want me to do? And Koresh said, well, why don't you have them come on out to the property? This is about 2 to 3 months before February 28th. Have them come out to the property. They can check out any of the yellow sheets on any of the firearms that we purchased. If they have any questions, better yet, put them on the phone. I'll speak to them. Henry McMahon went in the other room, and he said, I have David Koresh on the phone. He wants to speak to you. He's invited you out to the property. And Davey Aguilera shook his head and waved his hands above his head like this. He didn't want to speak to David. He never wanted to ever try to make any contact with David, other than when the four individuals ended up moving across the street, which was going to bring me my next story. These four guys move across the street one day out of the blue. This is about a month or so before the initial attack. And when they did this, there was four guys move in, a 2-room house. They bring in all this heavy equipment. You know, they don't move in furniture, but they move in this equipment, and they start to set up their little surveillance. And over the course of the next couple days, well, there was an event that took place that I think is pretty funny. Greg Summers, at the request of David, brought over some beer and some pizza to the guys across the street to kind of welcome them to the neighborhood. Seeing as how there's only 2 people in the neighborhood, you know, why not make friends with your neighbors? And so they knocked at the door, and they said, yeah, we're from across the street. We just want to bring you guys over some beer and some pizzas and say hi. And this hand came out of the door, grabbed the pizza, pulled the pizza in and slammed the door and said, thank you. I got my girl in here. So that's pretty strange, you know. I mean, obviously, either he had his girl in there, or there definitely was something they did not want us to see. So over the course of the next week or so, they did come in and finally make contact, and a guy named Robert Rodriguez, or Robert Gonzalez. One's an alias, one's his real name. I think Rodriguez was the alias. Came over and started to make contact with David. And basically over the course of the next, he had 9 to 13 contacts with David. I believe it was 9. And David instantly started giving him studies. Now, Robert was a man that was raised Catholic. And as David would give him studies, I could see this look on his face. I mean, it was like he was starting to get his question answers, like myself and all the people that were there. Literally, David could answer all our questions from a scriptural standpoint. You know, Steve Schneider and Wayne Martin and Paul Fata, they tried to rip him apart for months before they joined this community, and they couldn't do it. There was an interview that this individual did with the Washington Times, I believe it was, right after the April 19th, and the place burned to the ground. And he said a couple of very interesting things. One was that the interviewer said, was David close? Meaning, were you close to being in the community or being converted, if you will? And he said, yeah, I was close. I think that's very interesting. He said in other statements that the agents had to shake him up and say, you're here to do a job. You know, you're not here to get converted, Robert. Come on. He also said that when the FBI took over, the FBI said, what can you tell us about David? What's going to happen next? And Robert said, well, give me a Bible. I'll show you exactly what he's going to do next from that scripture. And the FBI looked at him like he was crazy. They wanted nothing to do with it. And then Robert said he went out, threw his Bible away, and you know, was very sorrowful. He had lost 4 friends that day. And I think it's really interesting that the BATF, I mean, Robert said he saw no signs of illegal activity during the time he was in there, and they still went forward with the raid. I mean, they have an undercover guy in there. Why won't they work with their own undercover agent? Why won't they listen to what he's saying? We'll talk about the warrant in a minute, but after this period of time, the Waco Tribune-Herald put out what they called a 7-part series, a Sinful Messiah series. That was very demonizing him. It was just a very harsh piece. They didn't ask for our side of the story at all, and they started to talk about if you're a Branch Davidian and you believe Christ lives on a thread-barren piece of land in the middle of Waco, Texas, and he's a beer-drinking, guitar-toting, gun-toting preacher. Because that's how it started. That's like the headline, right? And it's the first of a 7-part series. So you can imagine that we pretty much saw that something was about to take place. Now, the problem I have several problems, but the first of many problems that I have with the BATF attack is, number one, when you look at the warrant and rip it apart, basically they went to the judge, Judge Green, under false pretenses. They relied on information that was the child abuse information, and allegations came from a guy named Mark Bro, who studied under David for several years and then left. They relied on information that was 5 years old. Under federal law, when you go to a judge, you have to have current information at least 6 months old, or at the most 6 months old, before you can get a warrant against someone. Davey Aguilera, who headed up that report, said that Koresh was receiving upper and lower receivers to put together fully automatic AK-47s. That's a BATF agent. The problem with this scenario is an AK-47 is a solid body firearm. You can't get an upper and lower receiver for it. Therefore, how can you put it together, make a fully automatic weapon that's an AK-47? And now, this is in the warrant. This is what they went to the judge with to get a knock search warrant, which the judge signed. He gave him a knock search warrant. Now, I don't know what your interpretation of a knock search warrant is, but mine is you go up to the door, you knock on the door, and you serve the warrant, and you go in and get your evidence. Okay? They chose to serve a knock search warrant with what they called Operation Trojan Horse. And the code word for Operation Trojan Horse to go down was showtime. Literally, it's showtime. Now, they chose to serve this warrant with 2 cattle trailers pulling to the front of the building. 4 or 5 ATF teams. One team was to go to the back of the building. Another team was to go up to the side of the building and go into what they thought was the gun room or the evidence room. And everyone's seen the pictures of that ATF agent trying to break the window and get into that door, jump into the door, and then you see all this fire coming at the ATF agents, and you see the guy go down the ladder. Another group of ATF agents was to go to the front door and quote-unquote serve the warrant that no one ever saw in their hand and was sealed up. When the FBI had asked for that warrant, they said, oh, it was all shot up in the raid, so we can't produce that warrant. Literally, that was sealed up until after April 19th. No one ever saw that search warrant. Another group of ATF agents was to go to the front of an area where we had a penned-up area with 5 Alaskan Malamutes, Fawn and her 4 pups, and their job was to suppress the dogs. Now, there was an ATF, and I'm going to call it exactly what it is. There was an ATF propaganda film that was put out. It was played on HBO. I saw it on Court TV, of all things, the other day. I mean, on Court, I was absolutely disgusted. I'm sitting ready to go on Hardball, and there is this movie. It's called In the Line of Duty. And the reason I bring this up is because Phil Pendergraft, the man that wrote that, was given all this false information, put this movie out. It was made during the siege, before April 19th. This was already in production and was basically completed. He has since come forward and said, since he's seen all this information that the government didn't get him when he was making this particular film, you can call it that, he has said that that it's wrong. He did a 5-page letter and came to one of our memorials and apologized to all of the survivors profusely. And in his 5-page letter, he likened himself to, I hope I get this name right, Leni Riefenstahl, who was the woman who did all the Hitler documentaries. And once Leni went into Poland and saw what Hitler was really doing and what the Nazis were all about, she pulled out and all of a sudden became really, really quiet. Well, this guy, with much shame, likens himself to her because he made a propaganda film. And the reason I bring this whole little story up is because in their film, the ATF agents go up to the pen dump area where the dogs are with fire extinguishers, and they start spraying the dogs. And let me tell you, they didn't have fire extinguishers that day. They shot those dogs in cold blood. From the trial testimony, some of the testimony indicated that the very first shots may have been fired at the dogs in the penned up area from the ATF agents. This is all happening simultaneously while there's 3 helicopters in the back of the building that are supposed to be there for support, coming into the back of the building, shooting at the building, according to several eyewitness testimony. I personally saw the evidence of the bullet holes that had to come from the sky. They were in the ceiling with literally sheetrock hanging down. I saw they shut up our water tanks. I literally got on my knees and I looked through the entry and the exit wound. The bullet came from right where the tank is concave, and you could see the bullet hole where it came in and where it came out. And at an angle, you could see it was fired between the 2 towers that we had out there. It was fired from the air, absolutely. That's the one that killed Winston Blake. So, my point. They chose to serve this warrant like a dynamic entry style or a no-knock search warrant. I mean, they're already breaking down windows while they're coming up to serve the warrant. Now, the ATF has claimed profusely that it was an ambush, that they were outgunned. Well, if we were a group of, if you will, quote-unquote cultists that wanted to kill the Babylonians or kill federal authorities, and we had fully automatic weapons and we had 50 caliber machine guns, and we had 45 minutes where we knew that they were coming and we were laying wait for them, I'm here to tell you, unless we're terrible, terrible shots and all blind, not one of those agents would have walked off that cattle trailer. It was simply never part of the plan. There was no plan. The agents that died, the 4 agents that died 20 minutes into the gun battle. We have videotape of these agents standing behind cars, standing up, shooting into the 2nd story of the building where all the kids are, like it's a set of a Rambo movie. And yet they've been ambushed. They were outgunned. Their story from day one never made any sense. 2 pieces of evidence I'm going to bring up really quickly. One is the front door. And at that front door, it was very mysterious because the story from my friends on the inside was that David Koresh went to the door. He came down 30 seconds before the shooting began. He said, now, they're on their way, they're coming. Now, don't anybody do anything stupid. We want to talk to them. We want to work it out. That's what we're all about here. He was at the front door, and just literally all hell broke loose. I instantly was down on my face. I spoke to several people there at the front door. They all told me the same story at various times, that Koresh went to the door, he held the door in his hand, he had his arm out, and he said, hold on, there's women and children here, let's talk about this. The door flies back in his hand from the velocity of a bullet hitting it. He slams the door and falls back. Perry Jones, a 70-year-old unarmed man, goes down in pain from a stomach wound. And from that point, some of the people inside started to fire back and defend their positions. So this door was very important because we have pictures of it, and the 2 attorneys, I should say David Koresh's attorney and Steve Schneider's attorney, actually came in via the tanks one day, actually on 2 or 3 separate occasions, and saw the evidence of the helicopters firing. They saw the front door, and they saw that all the bullet holes were coming from the outside into the building. Now, there were 2 steel doors at the front of the building. One of them was entered in, or metal doors, I don't know if they were steel, they were metal. One was entered into the evidence list at the trials in San Antonio, and the other wasn't. It was conspicuously missing. And the defense attorney says, what about this metal door? Where is this metal door that had all the bullet holes in it? And all the prosecuting attorneys could say in their defense was, oh, that door must have disintegrated in the fire. Its sister door is entered into evidence, fully intact. It's got a couple, bumps and knocks and bends from the tanks running it over. But the other door mysteriously disintegrates in the fire. Doesn't make sense. The second little piece of information that I want you all to know about is the fact that the ATF were recording us. They had cameras at their surveillance house running all the time. The FBI, when they came in and took over the scene, the first thing they said was, we want all the videotape of the early stages of the raid that you have. The ATF said, we don't have any videotape of the early stages of the raid. I'm afraid all of our cameras malfunctioned. It becomes very convenient. I mean, you can say that I'm just making all this up. Look, it's all a matter of record. It's all at the trials in San Antonio. You know, I have a website. We're making an informational site. It's just the name of the book, a place called waco.com. I'm going to have the reports on the CS gas. I want to make the evidence available. I think that we've been lied to enough. Yeah, for the last 6.5 years, we've been lied to consistently. And it's time to lay it on the table. I mean, if you will, David Koresh, myself, we've had all of our dirty laundry exposed. Why can't the government do the same thing and say, well, let's, you know, I think the American public can take it. I think we can take the truth, and I don't think it should be suppressed from us. I think that's why we have a constitutional nation. I mean, I was raised very patriotically. I remember reading in the history books, Valley Forge, you know, how our forefathers, the people that died so we can have this kind of freedoms that we have in this country, have a constitutional foundation. And all the people that went off to Vietnam, they didn't even know why, and died for us. And yet, our government can pull this on us. It's just a terrible thing. You know, it's a terrible thing. And all I've ever said since day one is let's lay it all out on the table. Well, as you can see, this is going to create an atmosphere of mistrust, which of course it did. And over the course of the next 51 days, the FBI takes over. And you know, we felt that we'd have a better time with the FBI than we did the ATF. And a lot of things happened. They set up the speaker systems. They started to use this psych ops. And they actually consulted Russian specialists so they could make sure to get the best psych ops. And I guess they figured we'd be like, was it Noriega when they went into Panama and he was holding out and they started to play rock and roll music? Well, the day they set up the speaker system, the very first thing they played was an old Alice Cooper album. Hey, that just delighted me, you know, and Jamie and some of the younger guys were like, excellent, started calling in for requests. You know, hey, you know, the new Def Leppard album came out and we're in a siege. You think you can play that for us? They weren't too happy about that, and that's when they started to change their tone, and they had the rabbits being slaughtered and the phone off the hook for 24 hours, 48 hours, whatever it was. And, you know, from that point on, things just got worse and worse and worse. And through the course of the FBI controlling all the media attention and basically telling you what to think, we became the craziest bunch of religious wackos you'd ever seen on the face of the earth that probably deserve what they got. I mean, I think thousands and thousands of people are coming around now. And they realize that they have been lied to, but I think that the general American public still holds that perception. And I think that's too bad. Some of the people at Mount Carmel, I just want to go on record as saying, were the most brilliant people I've ever known in my life. I mean, I love to be around people that are better than me. I like to play with musicians that are better than me, because that's how you grow. You know, I like to be around brilliant people. And they were the most brilliant I've ever known. Wayne Martin, the Harvard-educated attorney. Steve Schneider, who taught classes on comparative religions. Livingston Fagan, one of the gentlemen that's in jail right now, who's been in solitary confinement for years. Livingston Fagan, he was a pastor of his own church in England. He came over to study, and I think it's important for people to know that a third of the people that lived and died at Mount Carmel were black. Where's the ACLU when we needed them? You know, I mean, Rodney King, we had riots in the streets. But no one knew this. No one knew that it was such a diverse group of people and cultures that existed at Mount Carmel. It's time people knew. A third of the people were black. I mean, that's... You know, they can't make us out to be the racist that they would have liked to have made us out to have been, and some of the reports came out that there was racial issues and tensions going on, which was not true. Now, like, and I'll give you an example, and this is one of the things that occurred, and this is why David was so misunderstood, and people like Mark Bro really fought against him. There's lots of reasons, but he had a study one day, and he says, I hate black people. And I was raised pretty liberally. I was pretty shocked. And everyone was quiet. He goes, I hate yellow people. And I hate white people. He goes, we here are people of light. We are people that want to understand the truth. And that's what I relate to. I want people of light around me. No colors. You know, nothing to limit you. And he would always do stuff like that to provoke you and make you think. And then there was always a wisdom behind it. And that's one of the things that impressed upon me. Well, I'm going to wrap it up to April 19th so we can start taking questions. Several things did occur. And I just want people to know, I was reading a lot of material today. And one of the things that I read was by a gentleman who has a very interesting website, and he did some articles. And you have to understand that when you're in a building and they're starting to play interviews from people that hate you and want nothing to do with you and think you're strange and think you're wacko and think that basically you're unworthy of life, you start to realize that there's no allies out there. It's us against the world. Not us against the FBI, it's us against the world hates us now. They haven't even gotten to talk to us. And yet, they just soon have us wiped out. I mean, we were hearing this on the speaker systems. And you start to say to yourself, you know, people want to say that Koresh was guilty of self-fulfilling his prophecy. I think that during the course of that 51 days, with the number of lies that came out, that the FBI, if there was a guidebook they could follow of what not to do in the situation, that's the guidebook they chose to listen to. They didn't listen to their psychologists that said, don't allow Koresh's message to come to pass, pull back. Don't increase the tension, but alleviate the tension. You know, they didn't listen to the human side of it. There's a picture in Waco, the rules of engagement, where there's this infrared video. But even before that, they have scenes where they're talking to the negotiators. And we sent them out a tape. I mean, everyone during the siege told their story on a videotape, and we sent it out so people would relay and say, you know, these are people here that are religious people. They're studying this book, and they have a right to do that. You know, no, they may be guilty of crimes, but they were just so demonized that when we sent them this tape of all the people, and I did a little interview, the FBI chose to suppress that from the public, and it came out in the congressional hearings. The congressional hearings, they asked about this tape, and the FBI literally said, we felt that if we were to release this tape to the public, it would create much support and sympathy for the Branch Davidians. Oh, what? You mean it might humanize us? You know, it might take away from your demonization? You know, I mean, I give talks and people say, Mr. Thibodeau, you've done a great job at hiding your horns and your cloven hooves. You know, I mean, from the perception I got from the press, it's what I expected when you came here. I said, before I move on, I want to, there's a quote that I thought was very profound, and it's exactly what has happened. It follows precisely what took place. And Senator Henry Clay said this in the 1800s. He said, the devices of power and its minions are the same in all countries and in all ages. It marks its victim and denounces it, exciting the public hatred so it can conceal its own abuses and encroachments. Now, I read that, I committed it to memory because it absolutely fit with what happened here. And I'm just going to give you one more parable, if you will, before we talk about April 19th. I'm a big fan of George Orwell's Animal Farm. I'm very happy to see that it is now a TNT movie, and I'm really looking very forward to seeing that. But if those of you that are familiar with this story will know that the pigs... Boy, that's pretty interesting equalization. That the pigs were the power structures of the farm, and the horses were the workers, and everyone had their role. And every time one of the farm animals questioned the authority of the pigs, the sheep, who weren't too bright, the sheeple, would break in to their mantra. 4 legs good, 2 legs bad. 4 legs good, 2 legs bad. And the whole farm would break into this mantra, and they would forget the question. They would forget to question the pigs and question authority, because the whole world's saying 4 legs good, 2 legs bad. And the FBI, over the course of 51 days, every single day consistently, federal agents good, Branch Davidians bad. Federal agents good, Branch Davidians bad. And the entire nation joined in. You know, and it's a shame, because I feel that we have the greatest country on the face of the earth. I feel that Americans are incredibly industrial. I mean, we've done so much to advance technology and to advance this world that we're not smart enough to say, I mean, there should have been someone that said stop. That was Janet Reno's job. She said stop. You know, these people may be strange, you know, but there's 2 factions here, and there's kids involved. Which brings me back to my original point. In Waco, the rules of engagement, when they go in and they show the negotiators, you get a picture of what they called the compound, what I called my home. They get a picture of Mount Carmel. And they get a picture of David Koresh, and the whole mental attitude was, that's the criminal. This is the enemy. We need to get him. They should have had pictures of Serenity Jones and Joseph and Isaiah and Startle and Cyrus and the kids that were in that building. That negotiator's house And the tactical commanders' houses should have been lined up with the pictures of these kids, and the attitude should have been, this is an innocent child. We need to do whatever it takes to get them out of there. And if it means speaking Koresh's language and not, you know, chastising him in the media and getting two theologians in that are willing to work with us, like James Tabor and Phil Arnold, who Koresh wanted to get his manuscript out to, then that's what we got to do. I think it's unfortunate that in such a brilliant nation that the ball was dropped, that we lost sight of that. And people are dead now because of it. You know what, I'm not going to talk about April 19th because I want to open it up to questions. I know we're running out of time, and I know that someone's going to ask me about it, so we'll get into some really juicy stuff there. Is that?
Yeah, that's fine. We just need to
okay.
when you ask your question, if you could stand up and wait for the microphone to get.
Yeah, incidentally, this is being recorded for C-SPAN. It's going to go at national, so if you have a good question, stand up and face the camera and make sure everyone can hear you. Yes, sir.
My question is the point you just made about the protection of the children. Shouldn't that have been a two-way street? I mean, shouldn't the rights of the children been, or the obligation of protecting the children, been considered from the Davidian standpoint as well, in terms of, well, maybe we should drop this, maybe we should put the children's safety ahead of our principles and go ahead and surrender for the sake of the children?
That's a very interesting question. It's a very deep question. I know it's one that most Americans had on their minds during the course of the 51 days. There's a couple things that I think you need to understand. Number one is when a tank drives through your living room, you tend not to go out to those people that are assaulting you. When they start setting up speaker systems, you know, you tend to incorporate it as a group and say, this is my family. But I think the more important issue is that 18 people, including men, women, and children, did exit during the 51 days when negotiations were going good. And Koresh had one negotiator he liked a lot, and he kept asking for him. They pulled him off. You know, he's basically a Christian guy. He wanted to help. He really did. And Koresh had a great deal of respect for him. They pulled him off. During the course of 51 days, they went through, I think it was 19 different FBI negotiators. You can't establish a rapport. You can't build a relationship with someone while that's going on. So when those 18 children, well, men, women, and children, several of them children, exited the building, one of the things that they did is they left with some of the parents stayed in, some of them didn't. The kids that exited left with very specific instructions. We have very specific dietary rules. We didn't want our kids out eating candy bars and running around like kids of the world, if you will. We believe that, you know, according to our scriptures, there's a certain way these kids should be raised, and that's how they were raised. You know, and they were all incredible children, very bright. They helped each other. You know, they could sit still. You know, I mean, they didn't run around and just wreak havoc. So the point I want to make here is that the FBI sent us in a videotape, and in the videotape, they had the kids drinking soda pop, eating candy bars, watching movies that maybe the mothers wouldn't have. The mothers that remained inside and the fathers that remained inside were very upset about this videotape. And they called the FBI through the only one phone line that we had. And they said, you guys are going expressly against the rules that we set out when we sent our children out. I don't want my kids raised that way. What are you doing? Why are you doing this? That's number one. Number two, I spoke to a woman. Her name was Julie Martinez, who became a very, very close friend of mine. And Julie had several children that died in there. She had 5 kids that died, and she died as well. And Julie came to me one night during the siege in tears. I said, what is wrong? She goes, I just got off the phone with the FBI, and they made it sound like if I were to leave here, and I don't know what words the FBI used with her, but I know her reaction. I know she was in tears, and she said, they made it sound like if I were to leave this building, I would never see my kids again. They made me feel so cheap and degrading and dirty for even being there with David and the people in the midst of the siege. So you got parents that have that believe they're never going to see their kids again, you know, and maybe it is a selfish thing, but when it comes down to a mother and a child, that's a very strong dynamic. And
Fear control.
That's a lot of the reasons why people stayed in. And incidentally, the kids were placed they were placed in the only area we had left to go. Most of the kids were at the back of the building in the concrete structure, and they were placed under wet blankets. Now, I've had federal authorities say, well, they were placed under the wet blankets, you know, to make it look like you guys weren't committing suicide. I think that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard in my life. You know, they had no place to go. The back on April 19th was cut off. The media wasn't allowed back there for some mysterious reason. According to the infrared videotape that's on Waco, the Rules of Engagement, and I cite this in my book, several gunshots were going off at the back of the building near the tanks. Now, people want to ignore this. You know, people want to say that I'm crazy and I'm some kind of conspiratorial nut for saying this, but I've seen the video. You can go rent it at Blockbuster. We have 2 explosions at the back of the building 6 minutes before the fire begins. We also have several rounds of fully automatic weapons, according to Edward Allard, I believe his name is. He was one of the gentlemen that holds patents on the infrared video technology. He says this is absolutely fully automatic weapons fire. Nothing in nature makes this thermal signature. And you can see these little flashes going off. 2 different areas. And the most amazing thing to me is as the fire's building, you see the flashes back up. You see the flashes go from the forefront closer to the building and start backing up as the fire's increasing. I wish I were making it up, but I'm not. It's there. Yes, sir.
I have a question, and that is that it seems to me that every action that the FBI took was directed at the children. In other words, when they introduced CS into your Mount Carmel, and this was discussed in the joint congressional hearings, they targeted the children. They targeted the children with the idea that their mothers would try to save them and rush out. They also knew that every adult had a gas mask, but gas masks are not made for children because they don't work. Their lungs are not strong enough. Another area of targeting the children, I think, was the so-called psychological ops program, where they showed the bright lights and the loud music and the other unusual sounds. Now, they claimed that David Koresh was brutalizing, in fact, beating, quote, beating the children, is what Janet Reno told us she was
Beating
told.
babies was the
Beating
actual
babies. And I think all of us can understand that if someone is susceptible to violence, then under stress, he's likely to engage in more violence. So these psychological operations, again, would target the babies and make them be beaten more by Mr. Koresh. So do you think that the FBI had any concern for the children as they claimed they had?
Not according to the actions, and you know, that's such a great point. I'm so glad that you brought that up. During the course of the 51 days, playing this music, I mean, you know, I'm a pretty peaceful person. And there was one time during the siege where it was annoying me to the point, because when you're tired, you put in earplugs, you can sleep, you know, through just about anything. I mean, it's amazing how the human spirit can adapt. You know, we're very adaptable. Kids aren't so, well, kids are adaptable, but it will definitely affect children more so than it would adults. One of the things that just is absolutely shocking to me is the fact that they would use these psych ops on the kids. But more importantly is people have to understand about the CS gas that they use, the tear gas that they chose to use. Internationally, and I've done a little research on the subject, internationally we cannot use CS gas in wartime. It is banned. However, there's no law stating we can't use it against American citizens. According to the Dow Chemical Report on CS gas, it says that CS gas is a riot control agent that is only to be used outdoors in an outdoor riot control situation, never to be used indoors, especially, it says, amongst women and children, especially children whose respiratory tracts are not fully developed. It could kill them. Failure Analysis, who's a scientific organization, they did a report on the CS gas in the form, throughout the course of the 6 hours of April 19th, how much gas they put in there. In some areas of the building, they put in CS gas that was 4 times the amount needed to deter a trained soldier, let alone what that will do to a little baby. Boy, I don't want to lose my next point. This CS gas is, to me, was one of the most barbaric things you could ever experience. I mean, I can't believe that they could use that. And Joyce Sparks, who was the individual who was in charge of the state investigation against Koresh and the child abuse issues, had come out to the property with the sheriff's department. And Koresh knew Jack Harwell, the sheriff of Waco. We had worked with law enforcement in the past. We invited the ATF out. We didn't go looking for them. They made it sound like we went looking for them, like we had some plan. She said in an interview that she urged the FBI not to do the CS gas plan, to wait them out on the 7 CM manuscript, urged them, and said, Well, basically, you know, should I get my team ready? And they said, no, don't worry about it. One time, don't worry about it. You know, what were they planning? One time during the negotiation, they were asking how many fire extinguishers we had in there. And did a report, he said, oh, we have 2 fire extinguishers in the building. And the FBI negotiator said, well, it's about time you buy some fire insurance. I mean, this might, go figure. And which brings me up to my next point real quick. Another interesting, terrible tragedy that occurred a few months before our attack, and that, of course, is Randy Weaver and what happened to his family in the middle of Idaho, in the middle of the side of a mountain. And without getting too detailed, I just want you to know the mentality of these people. And this is what happened. This absolutely, it came out in the trials for his case. His son, Sammy, thank you, was shot. His dog started barking. They went down. A marshal shot the dog. Sammy shot at the marshal. He ran back, and one of the marshals shot and killed him. The next day, Randy Weaver put his dead son in the shed next to the house and was walking to the main building, and FBI sniper Lon T. Horiuchi, who is one of the only people that has been left on the lawsuit. We have a civil case against the government. All the people we're going after has been thrown off except Lon T. Horiuchi, who was an FBI sniper that was there that day. Lon T. Horiuchi gets Vicki Weaver in his sights. Now, he starts opening up on Kevin Harris and Randy as they're running into the house. Vicki's got the door open. She's got her baby in her arms, and Lon T. Horiuchi from 200 yards away with a high-powered scope shoots her in the face. She falls forward with the baby in her arms. Now, in the trials, during that particular case, it was asked, Mr. Horiuchi, didn't you know from 200 yards away that this woman had a baby in her arms? And he said, no, I thought it was a firearm, so I shot her. Now, I've talked to snipers that, you know, I've talked to people that have been in the military. Anyone here in the military? Was in the military? 200 yards away, do you know what you're shooting with a high-powered scope? That's all I want to know. Yes, you do. This gentleman's waving his head yes. There's several people from all over this country that I've spoken to have told me the same thing. He knew what he was shooting. But here's the key. The next day, they had speaker systems set up in that little debacle as well. The next day, the negotiators or someone from the FBI got on the horn. They said, Randy, what's Vicki going to make you for breakfast this morning? I mean, that's unfathomable to me. That our federal authorities, our servants, people that under the Constitution have taken an oath to serve the American public could do that to anybody. I don't care if he's a fascist or a racist. He has certain rights. You know, this guy was never on trial. I don't want to get too far off. I just want you to realize that this kind of stuff happened to us all the time during the course of the 51 days. You know, I mean, the FBI agents would moon us. You know, the women would be looking out of the windows and they'd be mooning us and sticking their middle finger up at us. You know, this is the federal government? Yes, sir.
Before the siege, before all the troubles and the siege began, describe a typical day. What did you do? Were you happy there? What were some of the do's and don'ts, rules and regulations before all the troubles began?
Great question. In my book, a place called Waco, I spent a lot of time on these issues because humanly, you go through a lot of mixed emotions. You know, you go a lot of the things I questioned a lot of the things that were going on in there. But basically, I understood one thing, you know, I mean, some of the stuff that occurred there was a part of the plan, and I accepted it. Generally, we would play music or build. We spent most of our days building and beautifying the property. You know, we didn't do that because we were planning on committing a mass suicide. You know, we had put in the tracks, we were building up the house, we had built a pool for ourselves. And most of the times were spent working, and in the evenings we would study. We had 3 square meals. Some of the women would prepare, and we would all come in and eat together. And the studies usually occurred in the evening. That was your basic life. I mean, there were periods of time where we would watch movies. Everything was on occasion. There were times when everyone would have ice cream. There was times when we would get burgers. You know, and everyone in the community had a burger. But basically, people stayed there. People were what... They believe David Koresh was inspired. I believe David Koresh was inspired. And basically we spent our lives learning this truth because according to the truth, and I do get into this very deeply in the book, according to the truth, this group was going to be targeted and was going to be attacked. You know, we had prepared for that. At the same time, Koresh did everything humanly to try to avoid the situation. He also believed there was another plan, and that plan could go forward with music and he could reach the world that way. So it's kind of confusing. It's dualistic. And that was one of the hard things in writing the book. It took me several years to even conceive of writing this book because I thought it was such a complicated subject. I thought there was no way I could explain my experience. I still think to this day there's aspects of the truth that I don't even get into. I did not want to get into David's scripture in this book because I don't believe that that's my role or that I'm inspired to do that. So I'm trying to tell the story from my experience without getting to the hardcore belief of why we were there. And that's what's very difficult for me in writing this book. And, you know, I think it's something that can be researched. There are some of the Davidians that have written down their version of the 7 Seals. And anyone that's interested can look that up on websites. I couldn't quote the site right now, but I didn't feel it was my role. But what I did feel was that, you know, we were out there studying, we were out there living, and we'd bothered no one for 60 years.
Were you free to leave? Could you go to a movie? Could you go on a date? Could you go to the mall? Could you drive to Dallas or Houston for the weekend?
If you really wanted to, everyone's always free to leave. That's part of your free moral agency as a person. I mean, generally the group did things together, and the group didn't really depart from that. Considering that we were one body, according to several scriptures, if one person does something or does something that's against the basic rules of the community, it affects the entire community. And so living under that structure, yes, it was a rigorous structure, and yes, it was a very monastic lifestyle, but at the same time, it's a lifestyle that everyone chose to live. And I could have left at any time, but consciously in my head, I did not feel that I would be doing the right thing. I don't think that I could have left David to do my own thing in life and felt that I could look myself in the mirror. And I've read several books on psychology and social proof and combating mind control, and I saw all kinds of different literature that's out there. You know, I think that for me, I just made the decisions I had to make in life, that I was put here for a reason, to go through this experience for a reason.
Do you think you'd still be there if the troubles haven't started?
The question was, do I think I'd still be there if the troubles haven't started? I don't know. I think I might, but I also think maybe 20 years down the road, I don't know if I could have curbed my humanity that much. You know, I'm not a saint. You know, I'm a sinner like the rest of us. I think there were people there that were close to saintliness. I can't answer that question. It's something that was an experience that I took day by day. Yes, sir.
Alex Jones, a local radio talk show host, has been really keeping this issue alive, too, long before this latest revelations have been coming out. He's leading an effort right now to rebuild the church on the property up there. Do you have anything to do with that, or are you planning on going back, and who owns that property now?
Great question. I'm glad you brought that up. Something that I was going to get into. But the rebuilding of the church on the ground where all these people died and all these atrocities took place, I think it's a beautiful thing. And the fact that so many Texans, due to Alex Jones and due to people that do care and that do know that they were lied to and do want to know the truth, have come forward and not only donated their materials and money to make this project happen, but they've donated their time. They've come out on Sundays, and they've helped to rebuild this church so we can have a standing monument, a sanctuary out there, not only for the people that study, but as a symbol that the human spirit will endure. And we are adaptable, and as long as you hold on to your purpose in life or your sight, you don't lose touch with that, with what you consider to be God and what you consider to be right for you, that you can overcome. You know, those people didn't die in vain, and I think it's just so amazing to me, especially in Texas here, because, I mean, how much demonization was there here in this state during the whole thing? I mean, I came out of there, and I remember standing in front of the grand jury, and I felt mentally raped. The last thing I wanted to do was stand before 18 people that lived in Waco, that looked at me like I was the biggest freak they ever saw in their life, and didn't believe a word I said. That was the most uncomfortable situation I've ever been. I've been CS gassed, and that was a little more uncomfortable than the CS gas, frankly. So it's incredible that people have come forward, and every Sunday they go out there and build. It should be done the next couple months. And if anyone that would like information on the building of the structure, they can go to www.infowars.com to get that information, and also www.rebuildthechurch.com, and that's one word. And I just really appreciate everything that everyone's done. One of the goals I have for my website, which is a place called waco.com, is to put the CS gas report and put all this information, the warrant on there so people can read it for themselves. But also, and I should have done this years ago, and frankly, I was not proactive before. It took me a lot of time to go through everything that I had to go through in this and then finally come out on the point where I could say, okay, let's take them on. You know, it's gone far enough. My friends are in jail. I could be in jail. Not that I did anything wrong, but I could be in jail just for political reasons, and I want someone out there fighting for me. So what I want to do is start a petition to get the guys out of jail. I mean, come on, people. You know, we can let terrorists go and free them for political reasons, but 7 innocent people that are in jail, and the jury, you know, I'm sorry, Mr. Establishment, Mr. Clinton, Mr. FBI, whoever wants to criticize me on this one, the jury said if they had seen all the evidence that the judge had suppressed from them, everyone would be released. Everyone. The head jury forewoman wants a retrial. You know, people like Edward Allard Stone want a retrial. I mean, it's time. These people do not deserve to be there. The wrong people are in jail. And you know what? If these people have to go on suffering and suffering and suffering, then what a terrible, terrible state of affairs we're in here in this country.
Yeah, this gentleman right here has been waiting to take this last question.
Yes, sir.
We'll get to the sign.
We were listening and using the internet on this for some time when it was very active. And over 200 messages were posted on the board, and some of the people were pathetically trying to cling to the beliefs that we had, that this is a fair and honest and nation of laws. It was unbelievable. My conclusion was that the intent from the outset was to kill every one of you. I've heard nothing to dissuade me from that. And a Los Angeles rabbi said that a soul shall be judged not only by what it says and does, but by what it sees and condones by silence. And much of that has gone on. Thank you for being here.
Would you have a question while you're up?
Do you
But
feel,
thank you for your question. That's beautiful.
do you feel that the ATF had the plan of literally killing everyone? They certainly intended to kill the children. What you said about the dosage of CS, the children could not have survived 8 consecutive hours of pumping gas into a closed building. It's not possible. The children were dead from that.
Well, what I think is, and you're referring to the FBI, I think that the ATF, when they staged their raid and they had the helicopters firing into the building and they had the agents coming and firing, I think that their goal was to get Koresh. I mean, I think that's why they had the helicopters, frankly, and they targeted the area they believed was his bedroom. You know?
Why didn't they just do it while he was jogging?
Because they didn't want that. I mean, and that's a great point. Koresh jogged in front of their house every day for 2 weeks. He was in town all the time. And the FBI, when they took over, they said, well, Koresh was isolated. He never came out. And all of a sudden, people in Waco in the community said, hey, I saw him at Chelsea's pub 2 weeks ago. You know, I saw he was in my store just the other day. And he jogged with about 5 or 6 of the guys. I did it on a couple of occasions when I actually felt like I wanted to try to get into shape. I jogged in front of their house, too. 2 weeks right in front of their undercover house every single day. They could have gotten not only David Koresh, but a hardcore group of the young men around, and taken them right there. They never wanted to do it peacefully. That's what blows my mind. I think they wanted this dynamic entry. I think that it's something that we see all these cop shows. You know, we see this dynamic entry, this force. We got to go in and get these drug dealers. That's the point I wanted to make. That's the point I wanted to make real quick. They got the helicopters through. The only way that they could use helicopters against American citizens is under a loophole, the DEA law, where it states that if you are manufacturing drugs, all of a sudden you can use military equipment against the evil drug dealers and go in and get them. They said that we had a methamphetamine lab in there, and they went to the governor, and she okayed, Governor Ann Richards, okayed the helicopters to be used because they convinced her and they convinced the authorities that there was a methamphetamine lab. David Koresh got people off drugs. David Koresh didn't take aspirin. During the siege, he wouldn't take aspirin. He never did drugs. They knew that he never did drugs, but they wanted to get the helicopters. So why not lie? Let's lie, you know, well, not only lie to the American public, you know, hey, you know, they're sheeple. we'll just lie to them. You know, they're going to follow along with what we say. But let's lie to the authorities. We'll lie to the judge. We'll lie to the governor. We'll lie to whoever we can to bring about the end that we want. And that end is very proud. It's very arrogant. It's very, what's the word I'm looking for? It's very male violent. You know, and that's not what I thought this country was about growing up. You know, and I'll be frank, I was raised with some of the atrocities that were going on in Chile and Nicaragua and Panama. You know, anyone who sees the Panama deception knows that there was something more to what was going on there. But the fact that it happened here on this soil, it wasn't, you know, the government going out into other foreign lands and making this happen, or backing some rebel group that's going in and committing mass murders, or backing the Indonesians that went in and killed the East Timorese people that happened years ago. Years ago, you know, there was a massacre, not just happening now, it happened several years ago. It took a man like Noam Chomsky to bring this out to the world. It's just it's very frightening to me, you know, and now it's happening here on our soil, and unfortunately, there's a very large group of Americans that'll sit there and they'll see it happen and go like, well, you know, those people are probably bad, they're deserving what they're getting. And they don't even understand what the forefathers built this Constitution on. Can I take one more?
Yeah, let's come rushing back out.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, did the children have any schooling other than, like, the Bibles and stuff like that?
Yeah, they had homeschooling. There was actually a couple teachers that lived there. One was Sherry Jewell, and she was a teacher, and she taught the kids. But was more impressively than the homeschooling, and some of them did go to school for quite some time, and then they were taken out of school about a year before everything happened, and pretty much it was consistently homeschooling. What impressed me most about these kids is that the older kids would take care of the younger kids and would actually read books to them. So the sharing in that community was unbelievable. The fact that like a 13-year-old girl would sit there and read to all these little kids, and you know, they would just share different stories and stuff. It's like the kids educated the other kids as well as the adults that were in there. So yes, there was absolutely excellent education for the kids.
I could make a point about the dynamic entry you haven't heard. Okay.
I'm sorry, 1 second. Let's let Mike, and then I really.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
See, this is my favorite part. I could go on all night.
The dynamic entry is an interesting thing. On the one hand, BATF wanted to make a show type of entry, but much more importantly, I think, is who provides the justification for everything that happened, the legal authority. And the provision of a legal authority comes from the Office of U.S. Attorney, a branch of the Justice Department. And it was the Assistant U.S. Attorney, William Johnston, who participated in every aspect of the event in Waco, from beginning to the prosecution. And he is the man who demanded of the BATF that the entry be one such that Mr. Koresh could not get rid of any of the evidence. He said, I won't prosecute it unless you do an entry that doesn't give him a chance, that if you give him a chance to dispose of the evidence, I will not prosecute. So he gave the BATF the authority, in my opinion, to do their so-called dynamic entry. He was behind it, and then, of course, he was the one involved in that affidavit. He helped prepare it with all its errors and misstatements. He gave it to Judge Green, a former prosecutor himself, and said, here it is. The judge is supposed to look at it as a neutral party. Instead, he rubber-stamped it. And Johnston was involved in every aspect of it. In my opinion, if there's one single person most responsible for the whole incident, it's William Johnston.
One point I want to make to that, and then we do got to close, is also it's pretty amazing to see the turnaround that Johnston has done. And you have to understand that when Mike McNulty started to go into the evidence locker, which brought this whole thing back into the press again, when he started to do that, he started to turn a lot of people around, like Lee Hancock of the Dallas Morning News, who broke this. Now, Lee Hancock was never, ever favorable to us or the Davidians. She wrote some of the most incredible pieces that it just disgusted me while this was happening, and now she turned around. William Johnson wrote a letter to Attorney General Janet Reno and said, there's a lot you don't know that we have found out that I think the FBI and people are hiding from you and covering from you that you need to be aware about. They pulled him off. He's no longer working anymore because they say that they want to use him for a witness, so they can't have him in that capacity. So he's been pulled off of his official duties, basically lost his job, if you will, because he made this aware to Janet Reno. I mean, it's very strange to me. So it's like the higher-ups, I mean, people that were responsible for getting Koresh have done, a lot of them have done a complete turnaround. And it's just amazing to see people in power and people in authority and people with prestige coming forward and doing this turnaround. I mean, it just shows how powerful that this media structure is and that this government is in deceit and in taking you away from what is really going on. And so on the one hand, yeah, I think your point's valid, but I think that at this point, I think Mr. Johnson's doing the right thing. And I hope that more people do the right thing. I mean, if there's one thing I can say, I'll end with this. My view of the Constitution, my view of my studies of George Washington, Jefferson, Lincoln, and the document, inspired document we live by called the Constitution, is that if you take an oath, I don't care if you're a traffic cop or you're the President of the United States of America, my belief is if you raise your hand, you put your other hand on the Bible, and you take an oath to serve the American public, that's what you are, you're a servant. If you take an oath to serve the American public, then you should be held by that oath. And I think if you violate that oath, then I think the punishment should be severe, more severe than an average citizen who hasn't taken any oath that does a crime. They go to jail, right? Well, if we don't hold our official authorities responsible, then we're going to have problems that we've seen, like in Oklahoma. There are people that in a nation of 250 million people, you got some fringes out there. You got some people that don't understand what's going on, some people that can't handle their anger, and they do insane things. And if the government does not be truthful with us, if they do not hold the people that are responsible for lying to us and responsible for shooting us and responsible for deceiving us, if those people are not held responsible, then there will be more people that aren't so level-headed that'll do terrible, terrible acts. And the problem is the government and the media will blame it on constitutionalists. They'll blame it on us radicals like David Thibodeau, who's out there speaking against the government. I love this nation. You know, I think we've got the best form of government on the face of the earth, but I know that we can make it better. You know, there should be reason before there's any act of force. And if there isn't, then why am I here? Why are we here? Why do we still deceive ourselves and think we're living by these principles? That's all. I just want justice. You know, I'm not out for revenge. I want justice. There are people that are walking around that are guilty of lying, of killing, of shooting, of gassing. And there are people that are in jail that are innocent. And until the paradigm shifts, then we're going to have problems. And I don't want my nation to have problems anymore.
Thanks very much, David. Ladies and gentlemen, I have books available right over here at this table for sale if you would like to get one signed. And if you would please take a number. We are going to call number groups for the books to be signed. Thank you very much.
We want to start this line right back here.
The line's going to start right here. It's going to be just a second.
Thank you very much. That was really good.
Sir, my family is being terrified by the FBI too. Have you ever heard of Bernie Romero?
No.
He could be on the. He could be accused of some of the Oklahoma duties. I gave a friend of yours a leaflet and my phone number.
Excellent.
They kidnapped my
Following this discussion of a place called Waco, author David Thibodeau signed copies of his book.
Thanks. Hey, how you doing?
Good. Nice. When did you come out?
On fire. I'm one of the 9 fire starters.
The day the fire started? Or that when it actually started or earlier that day?
No, that during the fire.
During the
It
fire.
was, basically, I thought I was going to be shot if I left. So I preferred to be shot than burned to death was kind of my reasoning at the time.
You got it.
So I came out of the side so the cameras could see me, so it's an amazing thing. Would you like me to make this out to?
To Roy.
Finding them innocent is going to release information. Sure. They got to try them again.
Most people don't know that.
So you living here in Austin?
Yeah, I am. I love
Are you
it.
in the band now?
I was in LA for 5 years, and it's such a breath of fresh air. It's like the weight of the world off my shoulders being here, and it's the people. It's a great town, especially if you're in music. I'm surprised. I didn't think I could live in Texas again after my experience, and it's great. I really like it.
What I heard was the final fine from the ATF was $5.
Yeah.
Per 8 4 inch too long.
Yeah.
So it wasn't about that.
No, it was about clearing the government and not, having a way of
Personally, information is a longer term plan. I know that I'm worried about Texas. And our
Sorry, someone gave that to me when I was working.
Yeah, this is the card. That's the card this is the card that Steve Schneider and David Koresh gave to me that very first day. It's this very card.
Someone gave it to me at work.
The famed Messiah Productions card with the religious scripture on the back. It's Cyrus Productions, Messiah Cyrus Productions.
Yeah, I was wondering if it was real or not.
It's real. That's the real deal right there.
Cool. I won't throw it away. All right, thank you.
Nice to meet you.
But I
Vietnam veteran, when I got out there.
Gave me this card. He said, "Hi."
Hi.
get really good.
Yeah.
Congratulations for surviving and
Thank you.
producing the book.
That's right. Yeah.
What's your name, sir?
Conrad Schneiker.
But us keep it for the principal.
C.
This is C-O-N-R-A-D. And Schneiker, S-C-H-N-E-I.
Probably will get some.
SCHNEI.
N-E-I.
Well, then you
After I got out of
K-E-R.
the war, I just hadn't been even desire to pick up again.
General Clark, who was head of Fort Hood, was the one who provided.
Yeah, I forget to mention that in Texas, there's 68 million firearms for 16 million people, and most people go, the gun issue, they flip out, and they don't realize that it's a different mentality. I mean, Texas is
That's why they wanted to do that.
a very special place.
There's 15,000 registered machine guns in Texas that people pay tax on. At $2,000 a piece a year.
They were so horrible, nobody'd be alive in this state anymore. That's what Clinton and his folks wanted to do, put the big show on here to intimidate everybody else coming there with the big
Well, all
show.
you really got to do is go through the Texas Rangers reports. I mean,
Yeah.
they've got the evidence.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you very much.
You know, their hometown's Waco, so there you are.
I'm so sorry for what you had to go through. I'm especially sorry that this government did it. I told a lot of people a long time ago, said someday you're going to get the real story. You may not get it now from all the lies, but someday you will know what happened. And I think it's going to happen, hopefully.
I think it's happening on a much more mass scale than it ever has before.
Right,
You know,
right.
it's just people sometimes need a lot of time to rethink things, you know, and that's the problem with the power of the press and the power of
That's right.
an agenda.
That's right.
The agenda is amazing. And,
That's right.
scripturally, it says their words are like, their words are very soft, but they don't realize that they're like razors.
That's
like
right.
Swords.
That's right.
Very sharp. And
Just
they got me saying compound from time to time.
compound. Cult.
Seriously.
Yeah,
It's insane.
it is.
Your name?
Thomas.